I never expected to land a helicopter on my front lawn on a Sunday evening, but there I was, watching my father clutch his chest and collapse onto my kitchen floor, his face ashen and contorted in pain, while the HOA president stood at our neighborhood entrance with a clipboard, refusing to let the ambulance in without proper visitor registration. "Dad!" I screamed, dropping to my knees beside him. His breathing was shallow, his eyes unfocused. "Stay with me!" I could hear the ambulance siren in the distance, getting closer, then stopping. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor. "Karen's blocking the ambulance at the gate." I looked out my front window to see the flashing lights of the emergency vehicle stopped at our neighborhood entrance, where Karen stood with her clipboard and rule book, gesturing wildly at the confused paramedics. That's when I made the call. "Mike, it's Jack. I need the chopper at my house, now! My dad's having a heart attack and our HOA president is blocking the ambulance." 10 minutes later, as neighbors poured out of their houses and Karen screamed about property values and unauthorized aircraft, I guided the medical helicopter onto my perfectly trimmed lawn, the same lawn I'd been fined for letting grow a quarter-inch too tall last month. And that's how I ended up landing a helicopter on my front lawn while Karen screamed about property values. 3 months earlier, I'd moved back to my hometown after 8 years flying medical evacuation helicopters around the country. Dad was getting older, and after Mom passed, he was alone in the house I grew up in. I wanted to be closer, make sure he was doing okay. The housing market was brutal, and the only decent place I could find near Dad was in Oakwood Estates, a planned community with an active homeowners association. I'd grown up in a neighborhood where people parked boats in their driveways and painted their houses whatever color they wanted, but I swallowed my reservations and signed the papers. "Welcome to the neighborhood," Karen Williams said, extending a hand at my first HOA meeting. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, which were busy scanning my jeans and t-shirt with barely disguised disapproval. "I'm the president of the association. You'll want to familiarize yourself with our bylaws." She handed me a 3-ring binder that was thicker than my high school yearbook. "Thanks," I said, taking the hefty binder. "I'll give it a look." "Be sure that you do," she said, her voice honey-sweet but laced with steel. "We take community standards very seriously here in Oakwood Estates." I nodded, already regretting my decision. If I'd known what would happen 3 months later, I would have bought literally any other house in town. The other neighbors weren't so bad. There was Mike and Jen next door with their golden retriever, who they sneaked out after 9 p.m. when Karen was asleep. No pets outside after 8:30 p.m., according to Section 12, Paragraph 4. Across the street was retired Colonel Bryant, who fought a constant guerrilla war with Karen over the height of his hedges. And 2 doors down was Sadie, a kindergarten teacher who'd received a formal warning for the sidewalk chalk her students had used during a visit. "You'll get used to her," Sadie told me one evening as we watched Karen measure the distance between Colonel Bryant's garbage cans with a tape measure. "Or you'll go insane. Those are pretty much the options." My first official violation came 3 weeks after moving in. I was mowing my lawn when Karen's shadow fell across my path. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, clipboard in hand, "your grass needs to be cut to exactly 2¼ inches. You're at nearly 2½ in some spots." I turned off the mower and wiped sweat from my forehead. "You measured my grass?" "Weekly inspections are part of maintaining our community standards," she said, as if that was a completely normal thing to do. "Please adjust your mower blade accordingly." "You can't be serious." "I assure you I am. Failure to comply will result in a notice of violation and potentially a fine." She made a note on her clipboard. "Also, your mailbox is the wrong shade of blue." "It came with the house," I said. "Yes, and the previous owners were going to repaint it before they moved, but clearly never did. Section 8, Paragraph 2 specifies navy blue for mailboxes on this street. Yours is clearly Admiral blue." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. "I'll get right on that," I said, not bothering to hide my sarcasm. "See that you do," she replied, completely missing it. "You have 72 hours to comply." Things only escalated from there. I received notices for a garden hose visible from the street, Halloween decorations put up prematurely, October 3rd, apparently 2 days too early, parking my car in my driveway instead of my garage for more than 4 hours. Having an unauthorized wind chime, all wind chimes required pre-approval, who knew? By the 2-month mark, I'd received 7 official violations and was becoming the HOA's most notorious resident. An impressive feat given Colonel Bryant's ongoing hedge rebellion. The backyard deck incident was when things really went off the rails. I'd hired a contractor to replace some rotting boards on my back deck. Tony, the contractor, had just started removing the old wood when a throat clearing announced Karen's presence. "Excuse me," she said, standing at the gate to my backyard. "Do you have a permit for this work?" Tony looked at me, eyebrows raised. "It's just a repair," I said. "I'm replacing some rotting boards." Karen shook her head, her highlighted bob swinging with the motion. "Any external modification requires HOA approval. You need to submit Form 27B with detailed plans and material specifications. I'm literally replacing old boards with identical new boards," I said. "Nevertheless," she said, pulling out her ever-present clipboard, "work must stop immediately until proper approval is granted. The board meets on the first Tuesday of each month, so you can submit for the next meeting in 3 weeks. Tony whistled low. "Man, I've worked in some strict neighborhoods, but this is something else." "Look, Karen," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "These boards are a safety hazard. One of them broke under my foot yesterday." "Then you should avoid using the deck until proper repairs are approved," she said, writing something down. "Also, I'll need to see this gentleman's proof of insurance and business license." Tony looked ready to start throwing boards. "I have them in my truck," he said tightly. "I'll wait," Karen replied with a thin smile. After she finally left, Tony shook his head. "Buddy, what possessed you to buy in this neighborhood?" "Location," I sighed. "And I didn't realize the HOA president was clinically insane." "I've got 3 other jobs lined up," Tony said, packing his tools. "Call me when you get your permission slip signed." The next day I received a $250 fine for unauthorized construction activity. Dad and I had a standing dinner date every Sunday. Sometimes we went out, but more often I cooked at my place, or he grilled at his. That Sunday he was coming to my house, and I was making his favorite, my mom's old recipe for lasagna. He'd been more tired lately, and I'd noticed him wincing and rubbing his chest occasionally. "Just heartburn," he'd insisted when I asked. "Don't start hovering over me like your mother used to." But I was worried. Dad was stubborn about doctors, a trait I'd unfortunately inherited. "You should get that checked out," I said when he arrived, noticing him rubbing his chest again. "It's nothing," he said, waving me off. "Tell me about work instead. Any exciting rescues this week?" So I told him about a hiker we'd evacuated from a remote trail and about the hospital staff's ongoing prank war while the lasagna bubbled in the oven, filling the house with the smell of tomatoes and garlic. We were halfway through dinner when it happened. Dad put down his fork suddenly, his face going pale. "Dad? You okay?" He opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out. His hand went to his chest, clutching it. Then he looked at me, eyes wide with fear, and tried to stand up. He didn't make it. His legs buckled, and he collapsed onto my kitchen floor. "Dad!" I was beside him in an instant, heart hammering. "Dad, talk to me!" His breathing was labored, his skin clammy. I'd seen enough medical emergencies to know this was serious. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? My father's having chest pains and collapsed. I think it's a heart attack. My voice was steadier than I felt as I gave them my address. An ambulance is being dispatched now, the operator said. Is he conscious? Yes, but he's having trouble breathing. Is he taking any medications? I ran through the list I knew by heart. Blood pressure meds, cholesterol pills. Sir, do you have aspirin in the house? I did, and I followed the operator's instructions while keeping the line open, kneeling beside my father, watching his face contort with pain. The ambulance should be there any minute, the operator assured me. That's when my phone buzzed with a text. I glanced at it while keeping one hand on Dad's shoulder. It was from Jen next door. Karen's blocking the ambulance at the gate. What? I said out loud. Sir, the 911 operator asked. The HOA president is blocking the entrance to our neighborhood, I said, disbelief and rage building in equal measure. I need to go deal with this. Sir, stay with your father. But I was already at the window, phone still pressed to my ear, and I could see the flashing lights stopped at our neighborhood entrance, a quarter-mile down the road. Mike, I yelled, seeing my neighbor in his yard. Can you come stay with my dad? The ambulance can't get in. Mike sprinted over immediately. I'll stay with him, go. I ran. Faster than I'd ever run down the perfectly manicured streets of Oakwood Estates, straight toward the flashing lights at the entrance. And there was Karen, standing in front of the ambulance, clipboard in hand, arguing with a paramedic who looked ready to run her over. Need to sign in all visitors, including service vehicles, she was saying as I approached, breathless and furious. This is an emergency vehicle responding to a 911 call, the paramedic said, his voice tense. Nevertheless, protocols must be followed, Karen insisted. I just need a signature and— Are you out of your mind? I shouted, finally reaching them. My father is having a heart attack. Karen turned to me, unfazed. Mr. Mitchell, I understand this is stressful, but rules exist for a reason. Security protocols. Move your car, I said, noticing her Lexus was partially blocking the entrance, or I swear to God I will move it for you. There's no need for threats, she said, her voice hardening. I'm simply doing my job as HOA president. The paramedic looked at me. Is there another way in? No, I said, not taking my eyes off Karen. This is the only entrance. Then, ma'am, you need to move now, or I'm calling the police for obstruction, the paramedic said. The police understand the importance of proper security measures, Karen replied. Section 5, paragraph 3 clearly states that emergency vehicles must be pre-approved. That's when I remembered what I do for a living. I pulled out my phone and walked a few steps away, dialing quickly. Mike, it's Jack. I need the chopper at my house, now. My dad's having a heart attack, and our HOA president is blocking the ambulance. There was a beat of silence. You're kidding. I wish I was. How fast can you get here? We can be there in 12 minutes. Is there a clear landing zone? My front yard. Just come. I hung up and turned back to the standoff, where a police car was now pulling up. Karen looked triumphant as the officer approached. Officer, she began, I'm trying to maintain neighborhood security protocols while this gentleman's father is having a heart attack, the paramedic cut in, and she's blocking emergency services. The officer took one look at the situation and turned to Karen. Ma'am, move your vehicle immediately. But the visitor registration— Oh! Now! The officer barked. Karen's face flushed red, but she moved toward her car, muttering about reporting this to the board. Go, I told the paramedics. My address is 1462 Oakwood Drive. My neighbor's with my dad now. They nodded and jumped back in the ambulance as Karen finally moved her car. But I didn't follow them. Instead, I turned to the officer. I've called in a medical helicopter to land in my front yard, I said. Just so you're aware. The officer's eyebrows shot up. You what? I'm a medevac pilot. My crew is en route. Given the delay, I'm not taking any more chances with my father's life. I see, he said slowly. I'll follow you back and help secure the area. Karen, who had been walking back toward us, stopped short. A helicopter? You can't land a helicopter in the neighborhood. There are noise ordinances, property values. The bylaws specifically prohibit. Ma'am, the officer said, I suggest you stay out of this now. I was already jogging back toward my house, the police officer following in his car. Behind us, I could hear Karen's indignant shouts fading as the distance grew. As I approached my house, I could see the ambulance already parked in my driveway. Paramedics wheeling equipment inside. Neighbors were coming out of their homes, drawn by the commotion. And in the distance I heard it, the distinctive thump-thump-thump of helicopter blades. They're taking him to Memorial, one of the paramedics told me as I burst through my front door. They had my father on a stretcher, an oxygen mask over his face, but his eyes were open. His vitals are stabilizing, but he needs a cardiac team. Memorial's got the best cardiac unit in the state, I said, kneeling quickly by the stretcher. Dad, hang in there. We're getting you help. His hand gripped mine with surprising strength. The paramedic looked at me curiously. The dispatcher said something about a helicopter? My medevac team, I confirmed. They'll be here any second. You called in a medical helicopter? He asked, eyes widening. When your HOA president blocks an ambulance for 10 minutes, you stop taking chances. Outside, the sound of the helicopter was growing louder. The paramedic shook his head, almost smiling despite the situation. That's one way to handle it. We wheeled my father outside just as the helicopter appeared over the rooftops. I stepped away to direct them by phone to my front yard, which was thankfully large enough to serve as a landing zone. The neighbors had gathered on the street now. Colonel Bryant was recording everything on his phone with undisguised glee. Sadie was keeping children a safe distance back. Mike and Jen were helping the police officer make sure everyone stayed clear, and then pushing through the crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea came Karen. This is completely unauthorized, she shrieked, her face almost purple with rage. This is a direct violation of at least 15 different bylaws. No one was listening to her. All eyes were on the helicopter as it lowered itself toward my front lawn, the downdraft bending the precisely trimmed grass and sending Karen's meticulously styled hair into wild disarray. My crew chief, Rodriguez, jumped out as soon as the skids touched down, ducking under the still spinning rotors. He and the paramedics quickly transferred my father to the helicopter's stretcher. Mitchell, what the hell kind of neighborhood is this? Rodriguez shouted over the noise of the engine, glancing at Karen, who was now being physically restrained by the police officer. Tell you later, I yelled back. Let's get him out of here. You're coming? I nodded. I'm coming. Karen broke free from the officer and charged toward us, waving what looked like a citation form. Stop immediately. I am issuing an emergency HOA violation for unauthorized aircraft, noise ordinance violation, lawn damage, and... Rodriguez stared at her in disbelief, then looked at me. Is she for real? Unfortunately. Karen was still yelling as we loaded my father into the helicopter. The officer caught up with her just as she tried to physically block the tail rotor, which would have ended very badly for her. Ma'am, step back now, he ordered, pulling her away. You're interfering with emergency medical services. I'm going to have all of you evicted, Karen screamed as the officer led her away. This entire crew, the property damage alone? Her next words were drowned out as I climbed aboard and signaled to the pilot to take off. Through the window I could see my neighbors watching, some filming, some just staring in amazement. Colonel Bryant was giving me a military salute. As we lifted off, I caught one last glimpse of Karen, her clipboard raised toward the sky like some bizarre offering to the gods of suburban conformity, her mouth open in what was surely a tirade no one could hear over the rotor noise. Then we banked east toward Memorial Hospital, and I turned my attention to my father. Dad survived. The cardiac team at Memorial performed an emergency stent procedure, and by the next morning he was already complaining about the hospital food and asking when he could go home. "The doctor says you need to rest for at least a week," I told him, sitting beside his hospital bed. "And no more ignoring chest pains, got it?" All right, he grumbled. Then his expression softened. "Jack, you saved my life yesterday." I squeezed his hand. "Just returning the favor for all those times you saved mine growing up." "Landing a helicopter in that uptight neighborhood," he chuckled, then winced slightly. "Worth it just to see the look on that woman's face." News of the incident spread through Oakwood Estates like wildfire. By the time I returned home that evening, my voicemail was full of messages from the HOA board demanding an emergency meeting. My front lawn had a circular patch of flattened grass where the helicopter had landed, which I decided I would keep as a souvenir. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for Wednesday evening in the community center. I arrived to find the room packed, not just with board members, but with nearly every resident of Oakwood Estates. Karen sat at the center of the board table, a stack of papers in front of her, her expression grimly satisfied. The murmuring crowd fell silent as I took a seat in the front row. "This emergency session of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association is now in session," Karen announced. "We are here to address the blatant violations committed by resident Jack Mitchell on Sunday evening, which include, but are not limited to, unauthorized landing of aircraft, destruction of lawn landscaping, noise ordinance violations, disruption of community peace, failure to submit proper forms for emergency services." "Are you serious right now?" I interrupted, unable to contain myself. "Mr. Mitchell, you will have your turn to speak," Karen said icily. "As I was saying, these violations carry a combined fine of $4,750, as well as potential eviction proceedings under Section—" "Objection!" Colonel Bryant stood up from his seat. "Point of order!" Karen sighed dramatically. "Colonel Bryant, this is not a court, and you are not on the board." "I move to dismiss all charges against Mitchell," the colonel continued as if she hadn't spoken. "You don't have the authority to—" "I second the motion," called Sadie from across the room. "This is not how we conduct—" "All in favor?" Colonel Bryant called out. To my amazement, nearly every hand in the room shot up. Karen banged her gavel, her face flushing. "This is completely out of order. The board will decide this matter, not a mob vote." One of the board members, a retired attorney named Davis, cleared his throat. "Actually, Karen, according to our bylaws, a unanimous vote of attending members can override the board's decision on any matter not related to structural modifications." Karen's jaw dropped. That's not possible." "Section 17, paragraph 9, Davis said mildly. "I helped write it, remember? But the violations were in response to a medical emergency," another board member, Mrs. Chen, interjected, "during which you, Karen, blocked an ambulance from entering the neighborhood." The room erupted in loud commentary. Apparently, this detail had spread as well. "I was following proper visitor protocol," Karen protested. "My husband is alive because of Jack's quick thinking," a woman's voice called out. I turned to see Brenda Mason, who I'd only met once at a community barbecue. "If it had been Warren's heart instead of Jack's father, would you have blocked the ambulance for us too?" Karen seemed to shrink under the collective stare of the community. Davis cleared his throat again. "I move that we not only dismiss all charges against Mr. Mitchell, but that we also vote on whether Karen Williams should continue as HOA president." The second motion passed with an even more enthusiastic show of hands. 3 hours later, Oakwood Estates had a new HOA president, Sadie, who accepted with a promise to not be insane about it, a revised set of emergency protocols, and a much more relaxed approach to lawn maintenance standards. Karen, unsurprisingly, put her house on the market the following week. 6 months later, Dad was fully recovered and helping me build a proper deck in my backyard, without submitting any forms for approval, because Sadie had abolished most of the ridiculous restrictions. "You know," Dad said, hammering a nail with more vigor than a man who'd had a heart attack 6 months ago probably should, "I think that helicopter landing was the best thing that ever happened to this neighborhood." I looked around at the changes. Colonel Bryant's hedges had grown to their natural height. Mike and Jen's golden retriever was playing in their unfenced front yard. Across the street, a house that had been vacant for months had new owners moving in. "You might be right," I agreed, "though I hope I never have to do it again." "Mr. Mitchell," a voice called. I turned to see our new neighbor waving as he crossed the street. "I'm Derek, just moved in. I wanted to introduce myself." "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said, shaking his hand. "It's a pretty relaxed place these days." "So I've heard," he grinned. "That's actually why I bought here. I'm a pilot too, medical helicopter, just like you." Dad burst out laughing. "You're kidding?" "Nope. Heard all about your landing. Pretty impressive. What are the odds of 2 medevac pilots on the same street?" As if on cue, a moving truck pulled up in front of Karen's old house, which had finally sold after 3 price reductions. "Who bought the Dragon Lady's lair?" Dad asked, nodding toward the truck. Derek's grin widened. "That would be our chief flight surgeon and her family. She heard where I was moving and decided it sounded perfect." I stared at him. "You're telling me we're going to have 3 emergency medical flight crew members living on the same street?" "Looks that way," Derek shrugged. "Hope that's okay with the HOA." Dad laughed so hard I worried about his heart again. "Something tells me," I said, watching as a woman in a flight jacket climbed out of a car behind the moving truck, "that Sadie isn't going to mind at all." And she didn't. In fact, 6 months later, Oakwood Estates became the unofficial residence of choice for half the airborne emergency medical staff in the county. We never had to land a helicopter in the neighborhood again, but we all knew if we needed to, there wouldn't be anyone standing at the gate with a clipboard to stop us. As for Karen, I heard she moved to a high-rise condo downtown. No lawn to measure, no mailboxes to police. Probably for the best. Sometimes the most rigid things need to be broken before they can be fixed. In our case, it just took a medical emergency and a helicopter landing to break all the right rules.